All right. Hello and welcome to the 2020 Women's Panel, a conversation about how and why gender bias still persists in the workplace. This event is organized by the Women's Studies Advisory Committee and Workplace Learning in celebration of Women's History Month. First and foremost, I want to thank all the faculty and staff for cultivating a space for students and professionals to engage in critical conversations about complex issues we face outside these learning walls. Second, I want to thank each and every one of you for taking time out of your day to come and listen to our wonderful and brilliant panelists. We hope that you can take what you learned here today and go into your place of work more aware and better equipped with the tools necessary to combat gender biases. I also want to mention that you don't need to be a woman to be in this room today. It is vital, especially during this tumultuous time in history, that men become our allies. Us women cannot fight this battle alone. I mean, we can, but it's fair to say that we are stronger when we work together. So once again, thank you to everyone for being present with us today. Also, if at any time during this conversation today, you feel like these topics are too heavy for you, please feel free to take care of your emotional well-being by stepping outside to take a moment for yourself. A little bit about myself. My name is Roslyn Cassidy, and I'm currently a student at UCSD. I don't want to name off a list of facts about myself, rather I want to tell you a story. I was once a student at Mesa College, completely lost and confused about where I wanted my life to go. Like most community college students, I worked a full-time job as a bartender and carried a full-time schedule here at Mesa College. During my last semester here, a fellow coworker of mine sexually assaulted me while I was at work. After reporting the incident to HR, a full investigation was held, and in the end, management decided that I was to blame for his actions, and he remained a full-time employee. I was completely heartbroken. But I think that the emotion that was most prevalent during that time was anger. And once again, I felt so lost. So I decided to confide in one of my professors here at Mesa. Without hesitation, she sprung into action, equipping me with the knowledge I needed to pursue legal advice. But I remember the overwhelming doubt that just swam through me. And I said to her, I can't fight this. And she said to me something I will never forget. She said, your voice matters. Do not stop fighting this. And I haven't. Professor Sakina Gallardo, you have impacted me more than I can describe, empowering me through one of the darkest times of my life. Now that is what true solidarity looks like. This is why I'm extremely humbled to proctor this insightful discussion, as I believe it can be life-changing, just as it was for me. In the end, I decided to not let fear push me into silence because I wasn't just fighting for me, but for every woman. Without the consistent guidance of my professors, without the writing assignments given as a way to express my anger, and without the multitude of resources on this campus, I would not have been able to push through it all. I'm assuming that most of you in this room are students, and even if you aren't, remember that you are never alone, and just like Professor G always says, your voice always truly matters. So with that being said, please allow me to introduce our four panelists. I'm going to say everyone's name first, and then after, if you could just briefly tell a little bit about yourself. I'll give you about 2 minutes each to speak. So first we have Dee Dorsey, Alicia Rodriguez,
Hello, is this one?
Yeah.
Okay, great. My name is Deanna Dorsey, but you call me Dee, and I currently work for, or at the San Diego Workforce Partnership as a program specialist. My focus is supporting our justice-involved community. I hope today, by me sharing with you my experience as a woman, a black woman who is full-figured, and the experiences that I engaged with in the workplace. I hope it helps you.
Hi, excuse me, my name is Alicia Rodriguez. I'm a community editor at SB Nation. Basically, I'm a sports writer. I've been covering soccer for almost 10 years at this point. I've been full-time since 2013. So obviously sports writing has a reputation of being a very male-oriented industry. I think to a certain extent that's not quite the case, but obviously there is a gender disparity, certainly in the workforce still in that industry. And I would assume I have probably some insight as a result that hopefully will be of use. So thanks for having me today.
Hi, I'm Tamara. I have to start by saying that our distinguished moderator is very brave for sharing her story. Thank you. And to my panelists also, I mean, it's difficult to talk about these things, so I'm very glad. Thank you for letting me join you guys. I hope I can be of help. I grew up in South Africa, so different culture altogether, and came to America. I chose to go to university in Texas and study aerospace engineering, to which my father was very opposed. He didn't think that was a career choice for a young lady, I guess. And I eventually, by my own choice, decided I didn't really care for it a couple years in and switched my major, studied geology, and ended up working in the oil and gas industry, another male-dominated industry where I worked on ships all over the world with a lot of different characters, had a lot of different experiences, and probably handled some better than others. So if that experience can be helpful, I'm glad to be here. I'm now working in climate science and policy, helping the water technology industry become more sustainable. So I've pivoted into a new career and found I'm facing very similar challenges, surprisingly. A learning experience all over again. Thanks for having me.
Thank you so much for inviting me to be part of this panel. My name is Alessandra, and I'm a professor here at Mesa College in Fine Art. I run the Museum Studies program. I also run the art gallery. Throughout my career, I've also worked in public arts management and also as a muralist in Los Angeles. And so when I was invited to come to the panel, I was trying to think what I could present, and I just give you an overview a little bit about the challenges that women might face in the arts, but also as a Latina, you know, there's also other challenges. I'm originally from Mexico City, and I do want to emphasize that as a young woman, I had a lot of support both from my father, mother, family, and I was really lucky to find a lot of great women mentors throughout my career and education. So I think I was extremely lucky to have that support. Nevertheless, I still encountered some of the issues that we'll be addressing today. Thank you.
Thank you so much for being with us today. All right, so we're going to get this conversation started, you guys. These questions were produced by students in Professor Kara Smolovitz and Professor Gloria Kim's classes. Okay, so the first question is, as a woman, have you felt pressure to present yourself in a particular way in order to be taken seriously in your field? Please explain. Yeah, conversation. Do you want to start?
Well, I work in workforce development, and so there is a picture that you know, everyone basically sees when you think of workforce development. So my role is going into the community, talking to businesses and community partners, and engaging with them. And so there's a particular image that they're expecting. And so I have encountered, you know, men and women who have shared with me their, you know, my presentation and how I am to go out in the community and things like that. So I felt pressure from men and women, and I believe women more or less because of what has already been placed on us and how we should present ourselves in a predominantly male field or industry. They would tell me, this is what you need to do, this is how you need to talk, don't smile. And then the added pressure, being a Black woman as well, you're not taken as seriously. And then if you do come off, maybe a little more assertive, then you're looked at as an angry Black woman. So when I'm engaging with, men or even women in the community or with other businesses, those are the thoughts that replay in my mind. So I have encountered those type of engagements which put pressure on me not to be my authentic self. And so when you're not your authentic self, you're not your best self. So I have found that to not, I wasn't able to present what I needed to present very well. So that pressure definitely was there, and it presented, some anxiety until, I became more aware of who I am and more comfortable in who I am, and then I rocked my stuff.
I think that sense of authenticity and really being yourself is really resonant. For me, that was kind of the guiding principle for me in my line of work, for sure. I can't pretend to be something I'm not. I'm going to actually be myself. But I think in answering this question, for me, the way that I've been pressured to perform or to fit in with certain expectations comes from knowledge base, right? So I think oftentimes people who are kind of a minority in a given field, they have to feel like they have more knowledge than anyone else. Like you can't be caught out not knowing something. In sports, this is certainly true. I think there's this perception that the default is men are sports fans and women, maybe will watch the game with their boyfriends or something, which isn't true, of course. But as a woman who works in sports, I often have the impression that I need to impress random people on the internet with my knowledge base because I'm a woman, right? It's not enough that I'm literally paid a full-time salary to work in the field. I have to actually go above and beyond to, the old inside joke regarding women in sports. You like sports? Well, name the full lineup from the 1974 New York Yankees, right? Stuff like that, like these tests that women have to go through in order to, actually ensure that they actually have this knowledge base, which is unfair, right? There's lots of men who don't know the starting lineup of the 1974 New York Yankees, right? But they're not asked. It's only people in kind of differential positions and identities who are asked to do stuff like that. So for me, I think that's one of the biggest challenges. Something I encounter in kind of on a regular basis is sort of proving my knowledge base when I know what I'm talking about. But sometimes it can be a challenge in having to navigate that with the expectations of others and them thinking that just because I'm a woman, I don't know as much as they do. Right? So that's my perspective.
I definitely think there's something to that. I have a Yankee fan of a boyfriend, and he couldn't name the 1970 lineup, and I don't think anybody would think lesser of him for it. So there's definitely this need to feel like you have to explain or show how much you know to be accepted as equal. I think there's also an element of what Dee was saying. I think about my very first time on a ship. I was 23 years old and I arrived, and I had, my clothes. It was just me, and I very quickly learned that I needed to I decided I needed to adjust how I dressed to fit in a little better, because it was me, one other female, and a crew of 35 men. and I started wearing baggier pants. I had sort of looser t-shirts. I really wanted to be like unattractive if possible, because wearing even my normal clothes kind of made a problem for me. I felt like I was a little bit objectified. And then I would watch my colleague, the only other woman, and she'd been working in the industry a lot longer than me. She was an engineer, and to be honest with you, she didn't get along with a lot of the crew. She was very aggressive, and from my perspective, I could see why she was. Like, she had become that way after years of sort of having to prove herself all the time. So maybe the guys didn't really accept her. They kind of thought she was the mean, angry woman on the boat, but she would have been, I guess I looked at her and wanted to follow her, except be more assertive. And there's a really fine line for women between assertive and aggressive. So I tried to use her as an example, and at the same time understand and empathize with her. So she and I actually did bond, and that was really helpful. And taking those two lessons, so how I wanted to present myself as assertive and knowledgeable, but still being mean, took time. So eventually I kind of found a way to dress that was, still me, but appropriate, professional, and assert myself and show my knowledge. It took a lot of trial and error, actually, and you have to be kind of brave to find your confidence and be yourself. So that's my.
Thanks. Well, I can relate to many of these. So in the arts, luckily, the people are a lot more creative, so they're a lot more accepting of the way you dress. But I think in general, in society, you have to fight against the judgment of people, like women, you can't wear certain things because then you're too provocative. On the other side, when my mother worked in kind of business, you had to wear high heels, which are so impractical, uncomfortable, so you have to dress a certain way that doesn't allow you to be free or move freely. When I was in the arts, or I was painting murals, I could be, very comfortable and didn't worry too much about that. But I do remember in my mid-20s, I got a job working in public arts management. So this was doing art management, but it was within an entity that was the transportation authority in Los Angeles. So mostly we were working in the planning of the subway and the light rail stations. And so I would have to go represent the artists on their projects at these meetings with engineers and architects and contractors. And here I was, 26 years old, and I probably looked like I was 14. And I was trying to tell them that they were charging too much, to install this particular work, and argue and fight with them. And the first times I went dressed in my regular way, they kind of laughed at me and didn't let me talk. So then I realized I had to change the way that I presented myself. I cut my hair really short, and I bought some suits, that look more like, your traditional men's suit that women wear. And I just had to buy my steel-toe boots to go in the construction sites. And I just, next time I went there, I felt more empowered by dressing like that and just being able to speak my mind and not be afraid. And I just had to take the cues also from there was only one engineer in the whole transportation authority, just one woman engineer. And so I kind of took my cues from her on how to present myself. And I think the other thing that we have to fight against is if you are naturally introverted as a woman, it's just very hard to present yourself as an intelligent person who's going to contribute, because if you're introverted and shy, you just tend to naturally just keep things in. But if you're put in a position where you have to speak up because of your job or because you're speaking for others, you just have to, I tell my students, you have to figure out, take a speech class, take an acting class, whatever you can, to become more comfortable, because it's going to be detrimental not only to you, but also in your ability to help others if you just, keep yourself locked in that shell. So that's another way that we have to challenge ourselves, and we have to work harder maybe than others in this.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway from this question was what you said, Dee. When you're not your authentic self, you're not your best self. We're going to move on to the next question. Yeah, we'll start at them. Okay. Compared to your male colleagues, do you feel you get adequate time to speak? Are your opinions heard and respected in the workplace?
Well, when I learned to speak up for myself, yes. And I have to say that I was probably, I talk a lot. So from somebody who was introverted and shy, in community college actually was when I decided I'm not gonna be shy anymore. Because I just, realized that you are not contributing to the conversation if you just keep things in. So magically, I just changed, and since then I think that I'm very vocal. I fight my way, in conversations to make sure that I'm heard, and even with my accent. So I try to really be aware and be listened, but that bias still exists. I still remember I was part of a collective of artists and architects, and the LA Times interviewed us for an article that was going to come out, big deal, Sunday paper. So they interviewed us and we all spoke, and I said two really great things in that interview. So when the article came out, those things were attributed to the male partner in the group. So the fact that I had said them, the person just in their notes, they just assumed that it was the guy in the group that said them. And I was so pissed after that I just made sure that next time I talk to a journalist, I said, well, make sure that you get all your quotes correct. But you see that happen all the time. If it's a really smart thing, the woman can run it. You have to be the guy. And so, once in a while I've been questioned, by the words that I've chosen and things like that, but you just have to fight back.
I think there's a lot to be said for experiencing as well. That you go through one experience where you find that no one was listening and you were right, or you had something worthwhile to say and you didn't say it, or for whatever reason. And then you realize, I could have helped, so this time I'm going to try and put in my 2 cents. So I guess again, working in a male-dominated arena, I found that a lot of times I was too nervous to say the wrong thing, so I wouldn't speak up. And I had to kind of pay attention to the fact that a lot of times men will talk whether they know what they're talking about or not. So I tried to do that as well a little bit. And I found I was able to, the fact that I was the only woman in the room, I was able to spin that to my advantage because I might have a totally different perspective to offer. So as soon as I learned that for myself, it was a lot easier to sort of convey it to everybody. You also don't want to hold yourself to being perfect and knowing everything, like the lineup of the Yankees. You don't have to know that stuff. You can know what you know, and that's good. And something that you say will have value, so trust yourself a little bit. Yeah, I think I still feel, even in my current job, that I don't really get enough time to talk, and I'm very often in a meeting with all these old white guys and they're just rambling on, and it takes a little bit of a struggle to be cool, not get too frustrated, and still speak up, be assertive, get your voice heard. So it's a challenge for women. I think I would say you have to trust yourself and feel that confidence.
So I felt kind of similar to Tamara here, and I was going to take this from a little bit of a different perspective. For me, I've been empowered pretty much everywhere I've worked to speak up. I've been put in positions of authority. I've been asked if there's anything that you have an issue with or you're concerned about, please bring it to our attention, of course. That's what you're here for. And I think that's been, on the whole, extremely positive, because I am somebody who
Based on how I work, so I work from home primarily, so most of my communication with my coworkers is done through Slack chats.
Right, so I'm typically writing to people constantly, like messaging them, instead of talking to them one-on-one, or in my current position, we usually do Zoom meetings once a week, so we'll do like one video meeting a week. So the actual like blah blah talking time is really to a minimum, but communication overall obviously is constant, so it's a little bit different for me. I think depending on the medium, it can make a difference as far as how your message is getting across, how you are being received, that kind of thing, of course. But I do think that even though I've been empowered, and I think for the most part it's been a positive experience, I do get the impression at times that I'm expected to be the one to flag things, right? Like, you're the woman, so if there's something really bad that we don't know about or whatever, just let us know. And typically that's not an issue, but like there's one example and that is pretty vivid for me. At a previous job, it was right after the 2014 World Cup. One of the stars of the American team in that tournament, he basically went on like a party bender for like 6 weeks after the tournament before he joined his next team. So like he had kind of an unusual situation where he just went out partying after, you know, having a good time. So they were covering his exploits, which to begin with I was a little bit like, all right, this is weird, but you know, sure, we're online media, what are you gonna do? And one of my colleagues, a male colleague, wrote a story where the player partied on consecutive nights with Mike Tyson, Charlie Sheen, and Chris Brown, and they like made a really big deal out of that story, and they published it and put it prominently on the front page of the website. I was like, listen, by itself, there's nothing wrong with this story, right? Like, with no context, a band goes out partying with celebrities is not a problem. But all three of these men have not only been accused, but convicted of partner abuse, some of them multiple times in their lives. I really think this is a bad thing to highlight and, really promote. I don't feel comfortable with it. And I went straight to kind of the boss at the top to complain about this, and I didn't know what to expect, but I feel uncomfortable. I have some power. Let me see if we can make a change here. Immediately he was like, oh gosh, of course, none of us thought of that. Thank you so much for bringing that to our attention. Yeah, we're pulling it from the front page. We should not be promoting that. That's obviously, that was a good flag. I'm glad in that situation that I had the ability to say something and be respected and have something happen as a result. Even if it's something relatively minor, right? Like, it's not like this is public policy or, the justice system or something like that. It's sports. But even in a realm like that, to have my voice listened to, I think was good. But there's also the flip side, which is, I'm the gatekeeper, right? Like, if I'm on duty, then I'm the one who's supposed to be screening for red flags like these, which is a lot of pressure. And it's good that I'm asked to do stuff like that, and I'm given the ability to speak up if I need to. On the other hand, it's a lot of responsibility to have me be the person who tells if there's an issue, and that can be kind of a grind sometimes. So, good, bad, a little bit of both, I think, in that situation for me.
I definitely can relate to being in a space where you're like, my natural space for me is like, stick me in a corner, let me watch everybody, and not speak. But in my head, I'm like, I have these answers. But I've been in multiple spaces with men where it depends on the topic, depends on what we're focusing on at the time, where they wanted to hear from me, but they weren't necessarily listening, but they wanted my perspective because they were talking about maybe the justice system, or they were talking about urban schools, or they were talking about women's black women's hair. So they wanted to hear what I had to say, but they weren't necessarily listening. They just wanted to make sure that I said something about it because it was this particular topic or something. I've been in, a few situations where, I was talking, but they weren't necessarily listening to learn or to really gain knowledge from what I was sharing with them, but just to, check a box or something like that. Like, you got to say something, we met diversity and inclusion. So I've been in spaces like that, and I also believe as we are becoming more aware, we're becoming more comfortable with our authentic selves, then people are becoming more educated, and we're becoming more outspoken, and who cares if we mess up a little bit, but we want to let people know, what the reality is in our workspaces. So I think that's really important that we, push ourselves or have people to push us out of our comfort zones so that there can be positive change, continuously. There's been opportunities where, I love to share this story, but I was taking my manager, and mind you, I'm in workforce development, so I'm out and sharing with our community, helping individuals and families find employment opportunities. So I'm connecting with all types of employment, people at the C levels, executives, and things like that. So I have connected with this really high-end 5-star hotel, and they were hiring big time in their office, administrative office. And I have been corresponding with this manager for quite some time through emails, writing, they don't know who I am. And so we schedule an appointment to meet. So I bring along one of my peers and my manager, and I share with them, all the information, and this is what we're going to do. Really got excited. Anyway, drove up north, and I let them know I'm here. The manager comes out, never addresses me, goes directly to my manager and shakes his hand. Then secondly, shakes my peer, who is also a male, his hand. Never addresses me. So I'm standing there, because at first you're like, wait a minute, something's off. Like, you can't believe something like that is happening, in the year 2000, plus, right? But yeah, it still does. So I'm standing there and I'm waiting, like, okay. So my manager starts conversing with, this hotel manager, like he's the one that initiated, this partnership, and they hit it off, and they're talking about things that doesn't necessarily have to do for the reason why we're there. So they're talking and things like that. So we proceed, we go into the office, and now I definitely know what's going on. Never got acknowledged, and I'm looked at as like I'm the secretary. I'm looked at as like, I'm carrying their binders and, their information. I'm there just to take notes. So we go into the office, and now we're getting down to what we're here for. And by that time, my manager and my peer had no clue, could not speak to any of it. I just sat there. I just sat there until I was acknowledged. And by that time, when he did acknowledge me, I did not move forward with the relationship. And so, it was a long story, but I felt good about myself because I didn't give in or anything like that. No, you're going to come back and you're going to address me appropriately. And so that's just one of many engagements that I have, here in San Diego. But I mean, you would think things like this wouldn't happen nowadays, but it still does. And there's still people becoming educated and things like that. But not only did I face biases, being a woman with, my male counterparts, but also with my female counterparts as well. Because we're brought up sometimes, and these thoughts are put into our minds of who we should be and how we should be and how we should carry ourselves. And then it's passed down, and then it's taught. Because I remember, I'll put my gun. I remember someone's like, oh, what are you doing now? I was like, okay, I'm a manager, and I oversee this, and I do that. You do? Oh my goodness, well, you can't, now that you're in that role, you can't look like that. You can't dress like that. You need to put this on. You need to wear these heels. I'm like, I've never worn heels, and I don't feel comfortable in those things. You you need to dress like that, and then you need to carry yourself this way, and then, oh, you can't wear your hair natural. Seriously. And this was another woman telling me that. And at first I was like, well, I take it back, and I'm like, well, maybe she's right. Now that I'm in this, you know, new role of leadership, you know, I have to present myself a certain way. And so I did take that back, and actually I tried it out, and it didn't work. But that's only because I had to, again, learn and be comfortable with myself and just walk in that, you know.
I think Dee brings up a really good point, if I can just add to that, that there's a lot of unconscious learning, so that's a hard nut to crack. You have to get past the things that are in even women's minds. So overcoming unconscious bias is a big challenge. The fact that you were looked at as a secretary, I mean, that's years and years of everything, TV shows that show it as well. So, you know, to be acknowledged as you're the manager. I think I've worked in shipyards when I had to give orders to the guys coming to fix vessels, like welders and such. And when they came on board the ship and they were looking for the person with the instructions, they were not looking for tiny little Tamara who knew exactly where everything was and how it needed to be done. So you should see some of the faces that you get when they're like shocked. But I don't think it's intentional. I think it's subconscious, not unconscious.
I think that's a good transition to our next person. When you notice or experience gender biases in the workplace, what can you do? How does someone who is in fear of reporting gender bias in the workplace trust that they won't be fired or get in trouble?
Okay, I'll get started. I mean, I think this is the trickiest question of all, just because you never know, right? You never know. I mean, I think there are situations where most jobs should have some sort of policy in place. And if you work in a job that does not have a specific policy in place, if you're empowered to do so, you should ask for there to be a policy put in place. Because at least that gives you a framework to start with. It's not perfect. It may not always be listened to, but at least it's something where you can point to and say, well, there's a policy on the books that we have to, you know, it has to be investigated, that kind of thing. But I think this one's tricky because to me it's kind of a by feel thing if you're actually living the experience. You know, like with my last story of speaking up with something that I was not comfortable with, I was told, you know, it's okay, you tell us anytime, but even taking that step and saying, okay, I want to speak up, but how are they gonna say something about this? I got hired for my first full-time job when I was pregnant, and I was not asked about my status, you know, my status in an interview because that's illegal, right? But I didn't say anything for a few months because I was a little bit nervous, right? Like, what if they take it back? What if they start hiring me, you know, putting in fewer hours, that kind of thing. So I waited 3 or 4 months, and then again, I was working remotely, so I could get away with this, right? I could be showing extremely obviously, but my coworkers were in New York, so they couldn't see me, so you know, I could get away with it. And then finally, I broached the subject to my boss. Yeah, I'm pregnant. I'm gonna have a baby in the end of August, okay? And luckily, they were totally cool with it. You know, oh, that's fantastic, great, amazing. I think to a large extent, though, it's a case-by-case basis, right? Like, if you're in a good situation, then it'll probably be fine. And if you see something that you're not comfortable with, something that is patently illegal, you know, you can find remedy, but it's not a guarantee, right? There's still a lot of places where even if there is a policy in place, even if there is a culture of, you know, speaking up when there's an issue, it may not necessarily be dealt with appropriately. But I think you know, the big theme so far for me has been, you know, be true to yourself, right? Like if it's something that you just can't stand by and let it go unremarked, I mean, you know, you have to kind of, if you feel like you need to speak up, then I think you should speak up, and it's helpful for a positive work environment for everyone, but also, you know, you can feel like you have a sense of integrity, right? When you're able to speak up for something that you're going through or something that somebody else is going through. But again, I think the consequences are murky, and you don't quite know until you go through that experience.
Yeah, and I'm going to give an example, not so much from myself, but one of my graduates of my museum studies program. So she was working in one of the museums, and she, you know, there's always this assumption in a museum, a lot of my students actually go work in exhibitions. So they are climbing up scaffold, doing the lights, you know, handling very valuable objects, building things. And as a woman in that field, it was very hard for her because there was always the assumption that, you know, she was not strong enough, or she was not capable enough. And so there were a lot of cases in which she was more aware of, you know, safety issues and more vocal about bringing up these issues to the management in handling things like moving a gigantic T-Rex, you know, where she was actually up on a crane, and the her male coworkers would just not pay attention to her. And she asked me, what should I do? And I said, well, you have to go to talk to human resources and think, you know, I mean, that's the route that you usually go and speak to your supervisor. Lo and behold, she did that. And what they did is that they still gave the man the promotion. So sometimes even if you take all the right steps, and this was a woman that was the supervisor, so sometimes even if you take all the right steps, it's like you said, like case by case basis. You do have to figure out what are the procedures in wherever you're working, but also don't be surprised if sometimes that you don't get the support even from other women, and that's kind of sad and unfortunate. And if I just want to go back to when we talked about, you know, whether you're being treated the same as a woman or a man, in terms of, for example, a big issue for women is wages, that women are not getting paid the same for the same type of work. And I did have some instances in some of the jobs that I had where I was furious because I found out that my male counterpart was getting paid like $2 more per hour than I was. We had the same qualifications, we did similar types of jobs. I felt I worked harder than he did. And just because he was a guy, he got paid more money than I did. And I left that company right after I found that out because I just figured that they weren't valuing me. So know your worth, it's really important as a woman. And then the other thing that I was gonna mention is that we're very lucky here in that because, I think partly because we work in a union and so salaries are specified very clearly and there's a lot of transparency. All of our jobs have to list the salary, which is I think another way that women get, you know, the society gets away with paying women less is that they don't list salaries. And so, you know, women go in, you know, asking for probably less than a man would. But here, because everything has to be stipulated based on your years of education and your years of work, and so gender does not come into play, and it has to be applied very strictly. So I'm hoping that at some point more companies are doing things that way.
I have a lot to respond to Alessandra and Alicia, because Alessandra makes a good point that you should know your value, and you might want to leave a company that wouldn't support you if you bring up an issue like we started talking about. If someone, if something happens to you and you want to report it and you're not supported, then that's probably not the place you want to be. The key might be to, like, from my experience, I say I think I was 25 and on a ship and again, and I had a very bad experience with a very tall, strong man pulling me into a cabin on the ship as I was coming back. We had some shore leave, and I admit I had had some drinks, and that's relevant because he tried to take advantage of me, and I very barely escaped using the power of persuasion. I basically made that poor man cry out of guilt about his wife. So I escaped. It's a good story if you ever want to hear the whole thing. But I couldn't overpower him physically, so I tried to outsmart him. And when I left, I spent a lot of days deciding, do I say anything to anyone? Was it my fault? I shouldn't have had those drinks. I made the mistake. It was on me. And I will admit that my mistake, probably the only mistake I can say about my time working at sea, is that one. I did not report it. I may have mentioned it to a colleague who didn't push me to report it either. And when I look back at that, I think, I should have said something, and I could have said something to save the next person from the trouble. And it's been a very defining moment for me in that now, since then, and I have a more successful story as well, I have the integrity and the value. And if that company wouldn't have been okay with me saying something, I would have said goodbye and walked, because there's plenty of other places to go that will have your back, see your value. So it comes back to being true to yourself again. Whatever you can live with, do what you can live with in yourself. So it's really a pity that we have to deal with those things, but it's still there. And then women, I think, also have to learn not to blame themselves so much. That's a key issue. And to speak up for themselves. So with regard to the salary comment, I was hired by a new company in 2011, years after having a lot of experience in the field that I'd worked in geophysics. And I think that very morning I heard on NPR a report about how women never ask for more money when they get offered a job. And I think on principle they made me an offer, and I kind of said, oh, well, that's not as much as I was expecting. And when the guy I was speaking to said, oh, well, how much were you expecting? I hadn't really thought it through that far. All I knew was that I wasn't going to take their first offer. So I did just throw out a number, and he was shocked and came back to me, and he did pay me that amount that I asked for. And months later, I found out from my male colleague who was on the same level as me that he was being paid significantly less than me. Ooh, was he mad? So I took that as another empowering moment. Like, ask, know your value, just go for it, because there's always other options, and there's always, nothing that bad can happen. They can say no. So for both of those topics, just be brave and be true to yourself.
Being cautious of time, we're going to move on to the next question. How can we create unbiased environments at work? What is appropriate and not appropriate to say or ask in the workplace? What do you think about political correctness and its impact on our ability to create unbiased environments at work?
Well, how can we create unbiased environments at work? More education and understanding, everyone's different. And I think that's so important. We're finding that there's more and more education, and so that's so important. Just being comfortable with yourself. What is appropriate and not appropriate to say or ask in the workplace. I think it depends on your workplace. So know your work culture, know your work environment, and it also, for me, it depends on how long you've been there, who you can talk to. So just like in any setting, when you're in a classroom, when you're in, at dinner with all of your family, Thanksgiving, so just be considerate and be aware of your surroundings is so important. And what do you think about political correctness and its impact on your ability to create unbiased environments at work? Again, know your work culture, know your environment, know who you're around. I think that's so important. And then that will, assist you with your judgment in regards to what kind of conversations you will engage or start, who you will talk to, the impact.
For me, I think to create an unbiased environment, you need to be conscious, you need to treat others with dignity, like kind of basic guiding principles, right? Like if you're going around your everyday life, if you're somebody who's like rude to service workers, if you're not a service worker, that's probably not appropriate behavior, and it's probably going to bleed into how you treat your coworkers, things like that, right? And obviously, if you're a service worker as well, don't treat your coworkers badly either. For me, I think this idea of like political correctness, like I wouldn't approach it that way. I would say more, you want to have an environment where you're consciously trying to make sure everyone feels comfortable and included. So I think if you're saying something like off-color jokes are politically correct, like who cares? Like it's just a joke, right? Well, if it's something that's going to make somebody feel demeaning or provides an environment where people feel demeaned, that's not good, right? Like I don't think that's politically correct. That's just treating others with dignity. So I don't really approach it that way, but to me, I think having it as an inclusive environment as possible, again, as a woman who works in sports journalism, I typically work in mostly male spaces, but on the positive side, for the most part, my coworkers, typically don't engage in banter or locker room talk or whatever you want to call it in front of me, and I think in general probably not in a work environment much at all, because they're used to having people like me around, and that kind of thing would make me feel uncomfortable and not welcome because I'm not going to engage in that kind of thing. So yeah, I just approach it as like, again, like golden rule type stuff. Like treat others how you want to be treated. I want to be treated with dignity, so I will treat others with dignity. That kind of thing.
Just follow on to that because I echo that message, the golden rule. Like if you wouldn't want someone to say it, in front of you or to you, you probably don't want to say something either. So if everybody just kind of lived by that rule, then we'd all be a lot better off. You know what you don't want to hear, and you don't want to make anybody else feel the way that you don't want to feel. So I think I do it when I deal with a lot of guys. I do banter a little bit, but I use Dee's method of kind of getting to know who am I dealing with and make sure they know who they're dealing with, because there's some things that are acceptable and there's some things that aren't, and everybody's different. So like you can joke with me, I have a sense of humor, but there's a line where you don't want to get insulting. So both of those messages I have to echo.
So the first part of the question, how can we create an unbiased environment at work? I think transparency about salary, transparency about how you treat people, what kind of, so that everything is equal and out there, clearly defined. Also that as women, we're also kind to other women and supportive of other women. So as women, we have experienced these things, so then we can play a really big role in working and supporting other women that are coming up, so being mentors and being supportive, I think would be really important. And the more women that come into the workplace in these different fields, I think the more things are going to change. So in the arts, we're already seeing those things change. In terms of what's appropriate or inappropriate or political correctness, I maybe have a little bit of a different view, and partly because maybe I'm an older generation and I'm also like Latina, so cultural differences, it's very different if you're working in Spain, Mexico, Europe, the relationships between male and females are different. And so maybe I'm less kind of sensitive to certain things in that I kind of like blow them off as not being such a big deal. I have to deal with a lot of older male Chicano artists who, had their own very macho views of, art and things. But, I kind of take it with a grain of salt. I try to educate them in that things have changed, and hopefully I can. But on the other hand, I know, well, they're like, come from another generation, it's gonna be a little bit difficult that they change completely. And then on the other hand, throughout my career, and I've had some really wonderful friendships with men. And I think that we also should not be afraid to develop those closeness and friendships with, which are not like sexual or anything like that, but just true, a human being speaking to another human being for the things that we're fighting for together and trying to accomplish together. And I've had a lot of great friendships, and that also gives you another person to go to also talk about things and maybe, you know, bring in a different perspective. So I think those would be like bringing the human condition, you know, aspect and condition to the work environment and treating everybody like you emphasize what you guys said about respect, dignity, all that is really important.
Can I add one more thing?
So based on the idea of women supporting each other, I think that I would reiterate that as well. Again, I work mostly solitary, but in every workplace in which there's been more than one woman, we've always set up a separate private Slack room so we can vent together. Sometimes it's a place where you celebrate each other's work. Often it's a place where you vent, you know, or ask questions. You know, if somebody emailed me something and it feels kind of weird, what do you think? Or my boss is really being a drag today. You know, this isn't like a sexism thing. It's just, I just need to vent. I just need a space where I can have somebody who supports and understands what I'm going through. And I think as well for allies, you know, I also have male allies who, some are mentors to me, some are people that I'm peers with, that you can also just sort of talk about things and, you know, feel like they're kind of on your side. And it's not always something where you're talking about, well, me as a woman in, you know, in this field. Like, sometimes you're just talking as two people, but it is nice to have those spaces. And again, even if you're somebody like me who ends up going into like something where you're working online a lot, you're working in a kind of a solitary pursuit as far as your everyday work environment, you can still find those spaces for support, which I think is really important.
Yeah, I think the big takeaway from this question was, you know the culture of your workplace, and be aware of others around you and their feelings, and being respect the people that you're working with, and also solidarity, support other women, but also have those male allies that you can turn to as well. So we're going to get into the last question. So it's for women who are also parents. Did you ever feel pressure to work during your parental leave, or to return to work before your parental leave was over? What advice do you have to ensure that women maintain a healthy work-life balance?
You know, I mentioned that for a lot of these questions, I actually was lucky to have a very positive experience. But actually, where I have felt that it was the hardest was when I had my children, and I had twins. So it was more of a high-risk pregnancy, you know, I mean, I was fine. But I feel that it was really hard, and even I was working here, but I feel it was really hard because at that time, I mean, even still now, they only give you 6 weeks. And that's just, you here in Europe, they give you 6 months leave. And they give it to men and women. And I feel here, even though, you know, we're supported by a really strong union, and I think it should be thinking more about kind of women and mothers. But I've had colleagues that had a C-section where you're not supposed to come back to work after 4 weeks, and they have come back to work because they feel forced to do it. And I kind of have always felt really sad that when women make the decision to be working mothers, that we have so little support. And also even, you know, breastfeeding, there were no, at that time, now we have them, so things have improved. But there was no lactation, you know, rooms, you know, so if you wanted to continue breastfeeding, there was no place that you could go, express your milk, things like that you were comfortable, so you were not supported also in that way. And then childcare, you know, it's really expensive. And if you are a professor just starting out, what you're making to, you know, to have your kids in school or preschool. Preschool is $8,000 a year. And that's not like the most luxurious, so imagine with twins, you know, it was like more expensive. So that was really, we have a society that we're still so behind European countries and other places, on how we basically punish women who choose to be mothers and work. And so that's a very strong topic for me, and I just feel that we have a long, long way to go. And I also wish that other women, I sometimes wish that there's like this rift between women who work and women who don't work, or women who choose to have kids or don't have to have kids. I've had women who stay at home and they say, well, you should have stayed at home because that would have been better for your child. And then it's like denying your fulfillment as a woman, because I adore my job, Oftentimes I forget to mention to people that have kids. It's not because I don't love them any less, but because my job is such an essential part of who I am, and I adore my kids. And then also the guilt that comes along, always feeling that, you give it all, to your job, and then maybe you are not being the best mother that you can be. And I just still think that in that sense that we just are, as a country, we're not really that great.
I admittedly don't have children, but I did work for a Norwegian company while I had a pregnancy and a miscarriage, and they were very supportive, and I learned from that culture just how amazing they are with their maternity leave and their paternity leave. And I feel like I have to agree, we have a lot of chipping away at this kind of thing, but it's a lot like the other issues. We have to just keep working on it and explaining and showing why it's so important that we need the support. And like a lactation room is a small win, but when I was younger, I couldn't see why that was important, but I understand it now, and we need the people who will speak up and explain that it's not just for women, it's also for men, it's relevant to everybody, and family culture is important. So I like to look at Ruth Bader Ginsburg a lot of the time. She fights a lot, when she explains her fights against women, bias against women in the workplace, it very often shows men how it applies to them too, and how it's very equal. That's what we want, it's equal. So.
I don't mean to cut anyone off, but if we have one more speaker, and then we're going to get into a Q&A. So.
Do you want to take it or you want me to?
Well, I could probably spend like 2 hours on being a working mom, but I won't subject you to that. I have a lot in common as far as having maybe not negative experiences, but certainly not positive experiences as being a working mom.
I was freelance at the time that I had my daughter, and so I was entitled to no maternity leave. I had the reverse problem though. I told my bosses, okay, here's when the baby's coming. Okay, sure. Once you have the baby, we'll just stop scheduling you for shifts because I was working shifts at that time. Okay, great. And then like after about 2 months, I was like, okay, I want to start working again because I need the money. I had no money. I was not getting paid for those 2 months that I was off, and I had to wait another 6 weeks to get back into rotation. So I had a leave, but I did not get paid for it, and I was incredibly nervous that I was not going to get my job back. I did in the end, but it was pretty harrowing for a bit. Again, because I work from home, I raised my child literally as I was working. Often I would be breastfeeding with one arm and running the computer with the other one. So I was literally doing 2 things at once. I had to step away for diaper changes, but that usually only took a couple minutes. Yeah, we did limited preschool because I couldn't afford to do 5 days a week, things like that. I'm really happy I'm a mom. I always wanted to be a mother, but I always wanted to work and need to work for, to make a living. So for me, it wasn't an option of like, oh, would I like to decide to stay home and not work for a while? No, it was not negotiable. And it's a struggle. I certainly wouldn't say don't have kids, or if you want to have kids, you can have kids. But it's definitely an eye-opening experience. The stereotypes of having it all that they talk about with women. Oh, is it true when you're a working mom? You're just constantly thinking, I'm failing at my job and I'm failing at being a mother. Like pretty much, I would say for the first 3 or 4 years, I would say half of the week, I had this pervasive feeling of I'm not doing everything I could be doing at work, and I'm not giving enough attention to my daughter at the same time. So it's a struggle.
that being said, you can make it work, but it's a challenge, that's for sure.
Thank you so much, everyone, for sharing your insights. That was a wealth of knowledge that I feel like everyone really found a lot of value in. But we're going to open up the floor if anyone has any questions. And then I also want to remind everyone to fill out the surveys. And then when you leave, there's a box over here. You can just put it in the box. So whoever has any questions, then raise your hand.
Just for all the panelists, do you ever kind of experience that with members of your family, where they'll kind of put you in a role that you have to feel like the wife is staying at home, or the wife that cleans, and if you do, how do you approach that?
Yes. Especially because I have like great aunts and things like that, but my immediate family, there's always these expectations that they place on you, that they see you as and doing, and then just as yourself, right? And then you tax on getting married, and then they see you with children. So there's certain responsibilities that they see you doing, and so then they paint a picture for you of what they see your life to be, and then you go out and totally do nothing like that. And so, yeah, it's a big influence, and actually because, I come from a long line of strong women who had to do both things, be parents and work at the same time. And so they share things with me that I'm still having to chip off, because it just came from their world perspective, and that's not my world perspective. And so it's definitely impactful, and it does, influence how I engage in my world today.
For me, growing up in a Mexican family, I was lucky that my mother worked. She had to work, and so she was always very supportive. But she had 4 daughters, and I'm the only one who works. And because my other sisters thought that my mom worked so hard when they had husbands that could support them, they said, we'd rather be stay-at-home moms and take care of the house, because why would I work, so hard? So it wasn't so much that was pressure from my parents, it was more like the pressure from society overall. And my sisters didn't put pressure on me not to work, but they did tell me not to have kids, because they said you can't do both. So now you've chosen to work, so maybe you shouldn't have kids. And so it's really interesting, and so you have to always be fighting. I have to say my husband is really amazing in that he's very aware of sharing in housework, sharing in a lot of the responsibilities, and being as supportive. And I do have my twins, boy and a girl, and I have to say we haven't been that great in educating to be good contributors, but they're kind of spoiled. But yeah, it's things to keep in mind. It's hard, but I know that in certain cultures you do have to fight.
I have a father, bless his heart, who was raised in a pretty male chauvinist society in Southern Africa, and trying to get past that, I really had to just basically be pretty defiant and bold with him. But I'm very fortunate in that every time that I do achieve what I'm trying to achieve, he's pretty proud of me, in spite of, he thought it was the wrong thing to do, but okay. So you just be true to you. You have to, because otherwise you're the only one you're going to answer to.
Thank you, everybody, for your Q&A and for sharing your experiences. But more importantly, one of them, especially for you, also very inspiring, you being up here and student, being that you were a Mesa student. So could you go into detail if you're comfortable with where you're at with fighting your battle? Because maybe some of us are in a similar situation, and I would love for you to share your experience with that.
Yeah, of course. I can't go too much into detail just because it's already a closed case, but I can tell you the steps that I took after it happened, because when I went to HR, they were no help. And so what you can do if your HR department isn't helping you and they're not supporting you and being advocates for you, you can go to the EEOC. So they have an office downtown, and what was the EEOC? I don't know exactly what it stands for. People Employment Opportunity Councils. Yeah, so they have a group of investigators and they have lawyers also there that give you advice. They don't necessarily advocate for you. They're more like a mediator in between you and the company or whatever it is. So it takes a really long time. Once you go, you just tell them your situation and you fill out a bunch of applications, and then you wait about like 2 or 3 months to get an interview with the investigator, and you go through everything that happened. It's really hard because you have to continuously tell your story over and over again. But it's worth it to go through with it because it could be happening to other people and you don't know. That was sort of my case where I came forward and then other people came forward. Just keep fighting it. It's scary, but yeah, so they go through this whole process with you, and it does take a really long time. It was almost like a year and a half from when it started to the end. So, and you're just in constant communication with them, with your investigator. And I was lucky to have a really awesome investigator. She always told me she was advocating for me, even though she really couldn't. She had to, just be very neutral. So yeah, those are the steps that I took. And in the end, it was a small change that I made, but I think it was worth it in the end, for sure. But yeah, of course.
Thanks for the panel. It's great. I noticed, while you guys have been talking, it's been a lot about how you've changed yourself and your personality to fit and enter into these male-dominated spheres. But I'm wondering if there are ways that the male-dominated sphere conformed more to you, in ways that you were able to positively impact your work environment, and just examples of that.
I can say I work for an organization that's all about creating positive change in the workplace and helping individuals find employment opportunities. And just in our organization, we're trying to, because we influence organizations, so changing job quality. So through the education and our leadership team, which is diverse in women and men, just sharing the needs and what it's to create an environment of the best job quality. It's so important. And I can say within the few months that I've worked with this particular, almost a year, with this organization, and I've been under the organization, but it's very transformational, not only in regards to how women are included, but as well as men, and included in decision making and what we're looking at. One of the things that we're also doing is what we call 2Gen, looking at the challenges that parents face for childcare, how that impacts the workforce and families' lives, and what we can support, businesses and organizations so that we can be, it's taking a holistic approach in how we're, helping, those that are in the workforce, because all that matters. For me personally, if we address, my first priority is my family, and so how I'm able to support my family is through work and things like that. But that's something through the workforce partnership we are addressing, and that is part of job quality.
I would say for me, one of the big issues right now in my field is locker room access after games. So I do sometimes go to games and cover games live, and I don't know if you're familiar with the history. It's a pretty long history, but basically for a long time, women sports writers had not been allowed to go into the locker rooms in various sports after games, but their male colleagues could. They could freely come into the locker room and ask questions after games. So obviously those women were like, okay, that's not fair, right? Like, you know, we're set in an unfair advantage as a result of this. I think we're going through a little bit of an evolution now, and in the league that I'm mostly covering these days, which is MLS, there's a change where teams are starting to make media availability outside of the locker room to everyone. So, and I think in this way, like I understand the historical fight by women to get into locker rooms, but having been in locker rooms, it is actually kind of uncomfortable. You know, like you see people getting dressed after a game, you know, after they take a shower, like that's a very private space. And, you know, in context, I understand the fight for everyone to have equal access. Of course we should have equal access, but at the same time, you know, the athletes that we're interviewing, they should be allowed to put on more than their underwear in order to speak to us, you know, things like that. So that's something that I think that the fight that women have made has made a big change. But then, like I said, we're in an era where I think teams are switching a little bit. So it's like, okay, there's a room built off the locker room where the athletes are freshly showered and they're dressed and, you know, they feel comfortable. They come in, they talk to all of the media. And I think that's actually a situation that works for everyone because we're all getting access. The athletes feel comfortable, we feel comfortable. But yeah, that's I think one example of a way in which things had to change. They did, and now maybe they're changing again in a different way, but for the better too.
I think we have time for one more question.
I just wanted to take the opportunity to thank you, ladies. It was a very good discussion, and I want to applaud your courage and your candid comments. As a young person, I used to deal with my father being kind of my coach and giving me good advice until I got to that age as a teenager where I didn't listen anymore. But I think to follow up on her question, what advice would you give me as a male that I can take away from maybe some of the lessons you've learned?
I would say continue engaging in platforms like this where you're learning and then you can incorporate that into your daily life and in your workspaces.
I was just going to say that I think you got to become very conscious of what it means to be unbiased, because it happens sort of without realizing it. I'm sure those guys never really thought about the fact that women can't come in and that's a disadvantage to them. You know, they didn't do it on purpose, it's just how locker rooms are, right? So you have to kind of bring it up and make people aware of it. I know that I've had people make me aware of things, the fact that I'm a woman being in a certain place. I'm like, oh, well, how would one of you even realize that? So thanks for bringing it up. And I can use it to my advantage also, but the key is to be more and more conscious and supportive. I hope you have daughters, because it's good you're here.
Yeah, and I would agree that it's about talking and learning from others. And I'm learning a lot of things now with the newer generation that's talking about gender fluidity and, you know, and it's not like everything, society is just stagnated, you know, things change and we can make change. But I think it's by listening to others that have a different point of view, a different perspective. So as a man, talking to other women, other experiences, supporting them, helping them as a father, you know, or, you know, a family member, you know, to encourage, you know, that your daughters or female young people in your families to pursue their dreams and be supportive of them is really key. And as friends, also be supportive of your, you know, friends who are women, and wives, but girlfriends, partners in general. So, yeah.
All right, I want to thank everyone, or I want to thank all the panelists. That was a beautiful conversation. That was conversation that brought so much insight and different perspectives and cultures to light. I hope everyone in the audience learned something new about gender biases, or what gender biases may look like in the workplace. The big takeaways from today are the conversations we had about the pressure women face to present themselves in a certain way, respect and equity between male and female colleagues, feelings of inferiority, and what to do when you experience biases firsthand, and the challenges parents face within the workplace. So let's bring what we learned here today into our place of work, conscious of these biases and willing to use your voice to facilitate concrete change. So once again, thank you to everyone for coming, and I hope you guys have a really good week. Thank you.